This is the summary video for rotation number 2 for the PLC Wednesday for those staff members who could not make it on Wednesday. This is all about co-construction. So when we're talking about co-construction, really what our focus is allowing students to be a part of the creation of what success looks like. This does a lot of things. Obviously, it gives them the empowerment of having their input into what success is, but it also lets that familiarity increase, as well as create a gap from what they are currently in belief as success and to what is actually considered success. So previously we've talked about minding the gap, and that gap would be a separation of where they are to where they need to be. Over here on the right, we've got an infographic that I created based upon Caravanis' presentation a while back. It's all different co-construction ideas. Here's a couple of links. This one's to Michael McDowell. The first example we're going to do with the images is taken from Michael McDowell. A lot of overlap between these two, just simply because if you're co-constructing, your goals are going to be the same. You're going to want to make sure that the students are familiar with what success looks like. So jumping into our first example from McDowell, what we have here is an example of student work. So we're providing, in this case, 4 examples of student work, 2 individuals or groups of students, probably more commonly, where you are presenting the information completely new with no background and basically asking the students to rank the work samples. So this art sample that we have here, students in groups would be able to rank them from a level 1, 2, 3, 4, from best to worst, however you want to establish that in class. But then from that ranking, the students would then begin to think about, what does success look like? What do they think this concept is going to be related to? So that really strengthens their connection with the information, because they're looking at examples of student work without knowing exactly what they're supposed to be looking for. So it makes them look deeper and thinking about, okay, well, what could success look like if we're looking at this, that, or something else? So once they have established their ranking, once they have come up with, brainstorm some ideas about what those success criteria could look like, you could bring the class back together and start leading a discussion to identify very specific examples of what that success is. And in that process, creating an ending or a final rubric that the students have helped create, thus the word co-constructing. One additional piece to think about here is that this might be a good opportunity, once you've wrapped up and identified that final rubric, or that co-constructed rubric, where you could have the students ultimately create exemplars from these kinds of work, which would allow visual examples for students to reference later. This particular example is fairly simple. You probably have already made it this far, and thinking about your rankings would probably look something like this, where we've got our 1 over here where there is no shadowing present, all the way up to number 4, which is quite an incredible drawing. So depending upon where you are in your learning and what specific success criteria you're going to want to be focusing on, you may come into the situation where students would find it difficult to identify exactly what you're looking for. So this is where the teacher comes in and has to guide that to get the wording or the verbiage that would lead them to your final result. What I mean by that is, it is highly unlikely, if a student is completely unfamiliar with shading, that they're going to be able to identify that, well, we need to make sure that it has a highlight, a midtone, a core, a shadow, and so forth. So if there is a situation where the vocabulary is so specific, or the criterion is so specific, you may want to look at our second option here. Second option for co-construction would be an example where we're providing the verbs now. So in this case, we're going to watch this video here in just a second, but in this case, you are providing the learning intention to students and then asking them, what does success look like using individual or specific verbs that you were giving them. So they have something to start with. They can say, okay, name, define, restate, explain, analyze, and so forth, where they can say, pick out individual pieces of an example of work or of experiences that they've had in the past. So that may give them a little bit more guidance. So depending upon your content or expectations, this may be a good option as well.
Intention. Danny, can you read our learning intention out for us? I will learn how to independently analyze a scene in order to explain the hero's journey. Okay, so you can see in our learning intention, we're analyzing something and we're explaining the hero's journey. So there's two things that we're drawing a connection between. So that's how we know this is deep learning. And now we're going to co-construct what success looks like. When we meet that, what does success look like at a surface level, a deep level, and transfer? So we're going to do that together. Right? I want you to be able to say, well, I can do this, and success at a surface level looks like this. So I put some verbs there to help you think about what success looks like at that 3 levels. You don't have to use all of them, but I want you to just sit with the groups that you're currently with and just start to think about, well, what can I do? What can I name, define, list, or restate when I'm trying to meet that learning intention? And then if I were to deepen that, what can I then do? And then we're aiming for the transfer, so then what can I transfer? What can I evaluate, reflect, or present?
Thinking about that example there with the setup, obviously you have options for individuals, you have options for groups, large group, small group, however the case may be. But again, the key is just simply focusing on making sure that the students have awareness and input into what success looks like. Here's an example. If you continue that video all the way through, I believe the second video shows the examples of what the students actually came up with. So after some practice, after some guidance, after some exposure, they would be able to identify more specifically about surface, deep, and transfer based upon work samples or previous experiences, which is the case for that particular example from McDowell. So wrapping it up, just thinking about going back, tying it back to our ultimate goal, you'll see a lot of commonalities in all of these co-constructions. There's a lot of different ways for a lot of different content areas that would be more or less successful based upon your individual needs. But the commonalities there are essentially that opportunity for them to be familiar with the co-construction or the success criteria development, which helps identify that gap, and then gives them the potential to reflect upon where they are, what's next, and obviously where they're going.